Hi, I'm Vanessa Van Alstyne, and this is Art, I swear. Today's podcast topic, and it might be showing up a little bit late, I apologize, I'll get into why it's late, but I'm going to give a friendly little warning about this week's podcast. Gonna be a little dark. We're going to talk about some stuff that might make you uncomfortable. It probably will disturb small children. This artist makes some pretty grisly works. I also kind of can't talk about it without getting into some of the specifics. So if you're really squeamish, if you can't handle horror movies, like you're that kind of person, or your kid's real prone to nightmares, wouldn't give this one a listen. I also might loosen up on my language because, I like to keep this like in the PG-13 area, but there's some artworks that are just really kind of, you can't do that. So like I said, this is going to run a little late. It's like 1:30 on a Friday. I usually record these on a Thursday and then take a break so I don't have to listen to my voice again because I don't think anybody likes listening to them talk. And then I come and put the photos together on Friday, and it takes hours to make everything look right because I'm a little bit of a control freak perfectionist. I can't wait until maybe someday I can afford to pay someone to do this. Anyways, what's been going on with me is that I had a 9.5-year-old cat that was originally her owners attempted to declaw her themselves, and you can imagine how well that went. I rescued her from a vet who had gotten the gangrene to go away and done reconstructive surgery. She was in a good bit of pain at this point in her life, and she developed what was maybe jaw cancer, could have been a bad system of abscesses that were not reacting to antibiotics. I'm not a gambler. So I got her ashes back today, and I'm now in the position of what do I do with those? How do you handle the remains of, a creature that you've loved and had as a companion your whole life? And, I buried my dad last summer, and that's, it's another consideration you have to have with an adult or a child or anybody dying. So it's put me in kind of a morbid mood, I guess you could say. So I'm going to cover a very morbid artist that some people even call Dr. Death. Despite the comic book name, he's actually a pretty normal guy from England. His name is Damien Hirst, and that's not like Hearst with a U, it's Hearst with an I, so not entirely like the mortuary vehicle. If you want the quick and dirty on Damien Hirst, he's a contemporary living artist who's in his 50s. He's worth around $300 million, making him one of the richest artists that have ever lived. And he preserves animals in formaldehyde, makes dot paintings, varnishes dead butterflies to things, makes stained glass windows out of dead butterflies, creates giant ashtrays and a whole bunch of other crazy contemporary art. Da-da-da-da-da. That's all, folks. So he has this kind of typical, what we would think of childhood from, the 60s and 70s. And he ends up in college studying art at a prestigious art school. Where are my notes? Damn it. The university is Goldsmiths of London. It was originally a technical university. These guys all come out in 1988. And I say these guys because Damien Hirst is part of a movement that's called the YBAs, or Young British Artists. These artists, they're all kind of studying together, and it's one of those perfect moments of really good faculty, really talented students, and investors that are interested in promoting the careers of the young artists in their area at the time. The primary investor that drives this is a man named Charles Saatchi, and that's Saatchi. Those of you who are a little involved in art might be aware of the Saatchi webpage where you can put your art up for display and occasionally enter contests and stuff. Charles Saatchi doesn't just take a backseat to collecting like a lot of people do. These aren't just things that go on his wall. He's interested in cultivating these young artists' careers. by taking on these YBAs, these young British artists, getting them in important shows. Now, what Hirst displays in the show is a giant shark in formaldehyde. So just think of a giant dead shark with its, hanging from nylon strings so you can't see it, in a giant vat of formaldehyde. It's in a large box that's divided into several sections so that visually it still has a dialogue with minimalism. And the title, and his titles are real key, is The Physical Impossibility of Death in the Mind of Someone Living. I'm going to probably take most of my photos from his webpage. I will say that for the most part, he has a really stunning webpage. There's a lot of information about these works. There's also some very draconian language about using images from his webpage. He apparently wants you to pay a license to reproduce these. I'm hoping they'll see that this is for educational purposes. As maybe Damien Hirst, you have $300 million and I'm not. So the physical impossibility of death in the mind of someone living. This starts a dialogue with what's going to be his contemporary works for the rest of his career for the most part. And it's this morbid dialogue between clean laboratory setting of the medical industry against the rotting, gruesome facts of death. And now you're starting to see why this podcast came with a trigger. And to add controversy to the fire, the shark that is in this tank actually had to be replaced later because he is not a taxidermist and was not aware of proper preservation procedures, in as much as he had to stick a really big needle full of formaldehyde into a shark and pump it in and pray that it all took, and it didn't take. So he had to redo it later. How does that change this piece? Does the animal being swapped out make it different? Does that diminish the value of it? Does death become more possible in the mind of someone when the rotting carcass of a shark that's supposed to be preserved forever reaches a state of decay that it has to be removed and switched out? Would the work have more value and be more interesting if he had just allowed that water to become brackish and nasty? And I think about this as a reflection of an earlier artist from the Arti Povera, and I'm saying that really wrong, period in Italy, whose name is Piero Manzoni. And he has a piece that's called Artist Shit. Once again, part of why there's a warning on this podcast. I'm not kidding. They're not kidding. We're talking about gross stuff today. And Artist Shit is his own feces that he cans and puts a label on and sells for a decent amount of money back then. And you can't see it. It's unlike Hearst's pieces. It's like in a tin can. I think somebody actually checked once and there is poop in there, but I think most people are just going to take him as his word. Maybe the mystery of the poop can is best left a mystery in the end. If you think about Mr. Poop Can, the interest is that it's this decaying piece of him that will extend past his lifetime because in theory it's preserved. The decay and the shitty quality of the shit hidden from the viewer. So that has a dialogue with Hirst's work, and that Hirst has allowed the dead quality of death, the rotting meaty carcass, to just always be there, even if it's gray and blanched out and sometimes cut into sections like he did. There's a mother and child piece that's two cows that were going to go to slaughter, and he doesn't kill any of his animals. They're found, or they were already up for slaughter and couldn't be used for some reason. They're from a pound. So that's part of what makes his work interesting and really gross. That's part of how we talk about this kind of art. People, I would say by and large, who are not part of the art world, like easy pictures. I'm sitting in my bedroom looking at a House on a Haunted Hill poster and a Chinese food scroll calendar of a temple in China. There is another thing you have to talk about with Hirst's work, and we'll get to this more when we talk about some of the things he's done with skulls. Conceptual art was invented in the 60s. Invented is always a funny word, but let's just go with it. By artists like Sol LeWitt, who wanted to get away from the big budget gallery world that kind of fuels and controls art to a certain extent. And part of his doing that was to create pieces that can't really be owned but are still purchased. What LeWitt does, and to tell you, there's two parts that you have to look at him for Hirst. Is one is these like boxy things that he made. Number two are these wall paintings that are these like massive murals, but you don't buy the wall. I mean, come on, what are you gonna like chip it out and mail it to your mom? No, you buy a piece of paper that instructs you how to paint the wall. So he's removed himself as an artist to a certain extent and brought the value of it into question, especially because it's something that can exist in an altered state with all of these, variables around it anywhere on Earth, provided you own or have a copy of that piece of paper. And if, like, let's say a Sol LeWitt set of instructions started getting reproduced and spread all over the internet, what is the value of that? Yes, people pay a lot of money for those instructions, but then people pay a lot of money for like hair clippings from celebrities. And I feel like understanding Hirst and understanding conceptualism, you have to understand that it comes from this place in media where we are detached from life. Another thing you have to look at with Hirst, and there's a lot of writing on Artist Spectacle. I tried to put some of that in the show notes, but the main writer that covers Hirst seems to have taken those offline. I'm sure he wants money for you to actually read them. I could probably go to a library, but I don't like people that much, and there's like germs and things. Anyways, Hirst has done public work outside of these large preserved things because those obviously can't really be out in the elements. A lot of times they're anatomical models or these kitsch statues that reference some kind of like disease or illness. You've seen a theme here. And when I say kitsch is a word that means, one, something that appeals to popular lowbrow taste and is often of poor quality, or two, tacky or lowbrow quality or condition. The easiest way to explain kitsch to you is, those cute little angel statues your grandma collects that got the big old eyes and they're praying and gosh, they're cute, but the paint's a little off and you kind of hate them because they're so dumb? That's kitsch. Or lawn flamingos. They're pink, they're great. I actually really like those. They're the cheapest pink plastic ever. In like 2 years, they rot into a thin plastic shell that you can crack. As I'm thinking about it, is a little girl that's, a little blonde Caucasian girl that's otherwise very adorable, but she's got a leg brace like she had polio. There is a kitschy quality to medical models because they're made to educate a doctor, but at the same time display a basic understanding of this anatomy. There's also a series of display cases he's created over the years, one of which features these medical models in a triptych. They're set up as kind of a trinity. There's a religious quality to them. And Hirst himself has said in interviews that he does not believe in God, but that art is a god to him. That's part of the understanding here, is these found objects, like we talked about with Louise Nevelson, that kind of we can trace back to Joseph Cornell, where we're reintegrating them in an assemblage inside of a new space so that they take on a different context. Here he's asking you to consider the religious aspects of both art and medicine, because in a way we trust our pharmacist more than we would ever trust God Almighty in the heavens. They give us clean boxes of cure-alls or cure specifics that are supposed to take our diseases away. And we believe in these pills so much, we don't exercise, we don't take care of ourselves, and we just hope that that magic pill is really going to make everything better. And sometimes it does. And this further reflects in some of his work where he creates a reproduction of a pharmacy. And it's all the little boxes and all the little things set into these shelves that look a lot like the ones the medical models are in. And when you go inside, there's a neon glowing cross that, says RX, like you're in a church, but also like this art space and the quality of pharmaceuticals have become holy. And you enter it, and there's these those little rolly stools. And I mean, he reproduces this right down to there's a desk with like a ledger and stuff and a lamp and a keyboard, not a keyboard, a lamp and, things to write with and such. Also, I'm going to say, if you're thinking, man, I'm going to rob me a Damien Hirst and get so high, don't. There is absolutely nothing in those bottles. He collected the empties from pharmacies. Okay, so on the little rolly things in the center, there's like sugar cubes and water, and hanging in the middle of the pharmacy is a fly zapper. This is a reference to another early piece of his, one of the first ones that really got him attention, where he creates a glass box, a lot like the one that holds the shark, with wood on the edges so that it's these minimalist squares. On one side of the box, flies are born. Flies, the little black things that eat death and continue their own life cycle. On the other side of the giant box is a cow's head, like a butchered cow's head with blood that the flies can eat, and then a zapper right overhead. So they're constantly being born, maybe reproducing, maybe surviving, eating, and then maybe dying. It's the cycle of life. And that's what also goes on in the pharmacy. It's supposed to be flies are just allowed to go all over the museum and possibly die in the pharmacy, possibly live off of the food, possibly escape out into the wild. Now, understandably, a lot of museums don't let him display this piece with the fly. Damien Hirst then actually takes pills and displays them on a stainless steel shelf. Some of them are gilded with actual gold. All these little pills and lines. Some of them are real small, some of them are real tall, some of them are real long. And there is a specific, he's written out detailed plans so that you know where each little pill goes. He's also made display cases like this with cubic zirconia diamonds, so that you start to have a dialogue not just with the pills, but with wealth itself. Wealth on display, the idea that a diamond is forever. And he's also done this with cigarettes. He had people butt out cigarettes and fallen over, standing up straight. Like I said, there's a diorama you follow to install it. And it's once again on these shallow shelves. So you have the promise of immortality, that is the diamond. Promise of death, that is the cigarette. And the promise of the cure, that is medicine. Now, one of the problem with these pieces is they weren't all exactly made at the same time, and I feel like to fully get an understanding of what he's trying to say with those, seeing them all together is really important, but unless you go to a show that just has lucked out or is a retrospective, you're not going to see all three pieces together. And like I said, they weren't exactly at the same time. So you're following a lot of his work through this timeline. If you just do it linearly, you kind of see how he started to piece together things, but you can easily take it out of context if you're not really looking at those pieces and how they relate and drawing the correlations between each other, which is another really nice thing about what his webpage does, is the way you can browse it. It's not so much linear, it's like these are things that I've made in groupings. And the cigarettes came out of an interesting period for him where he made these giant ashtrays. And inside are filled with the smoking-related detritus, not just for cigarettes, collected from nightclubs. And they have been allowed to rot. I've seen pictures of them really early on, and I've seen pictures of them later. And, there is a shelf life for cigarettes and cigarette packages. And he has said that, he used to smoke, and that for him a cigarette is the entire process of life. There is the brand new cigarette pulled from the pack, lit, and it lives its life in just a few quick minutes, satisfying someone, and then it's butted out without any thought to its having lived for a purpose. And this reflects in some other pieces. He did there are some boxes that are like the ones that the preserved animals are inside of that house people. And they almost always house cigarettes of some kind. Like there's one where he obviously just sat in there and smoked, and it's just preserved like that. There's one that houses butterflies and also has pig's blood, which is something butterflies eat in the wild. They eat the blood of animals. And there's a scientist and research equipment. So we're once again having that conversation of life, death, and cure-alls in between. And butterflies are a great segue for the next body of work I want to talk about with him. And this is probably one of the ones that pissed people off the most. In the art world anyways. And I don't mean he paints paintings of butterflies. He thought back to when he was an art student, and occasionally when you're sealing a painting in like resin or a real thick medium, a fly will come up and it'll land and it won't be able to pull itself back off. You basically gotten a fly stuck to your very expensive and time-consuming glue trap. And so he takes what are already dead butterflies and puts them on these brightly colored pieces of canvas. Sometimes they're shaped like hearts, and I'm pretty sure the shaped like hearts are straight up a middle finger to the art world, because like I said, these are not well received. And I feel like some of it is the kitsch of the butterfly. The art world liked Dr. Death. They don't like Dr. Death being cute. They wanted Dr. Death to have peaked early and stop, is my opinion, but I really don't like the art world, so please take that with a grain of salt. I am a bitter old hag. And sometimes with the butterfly paintings, he'll have a room that has canvases on it so that the butterflies can alight on the canvases, but they're alive. There's things to feed them in front of the canvases, like windowsill boxes. He puts nectar and things. And you go in and they land on you and they land on the canvas. And the concept here is that you kind of have to think about yourself as you relate to these pieces of artwork and how you as the viewer take a role in these artworks. And there's a lot of pieces from the minimalist period, which is what it sounds like, and from the conceptual period, where they're saying that the thing that exists in the artist's mind is really more important than the work itself. I want you to look at pictures by Donald Judd, who created these cubes that are highly reflective in a row and exist to reflect the landscape around them. He also did these boxes that stack up and they have transparent colored centers and the light falls through them. And that's just part of the art. It's about just the way those things exist on the wall. There's another minimalist called Dan Flavin who installed sometimes boxes, sometimes long vertical pieces, sometimes they're referential to shapes, but they're all fluorescent lights. And there's even some of his pieces where you enter a room, like you enter the butterfly room, like you enter the pharmacy, like you enter any space where a Hirst piece is very large and in charge. And for Flavin, it's these colored fluorescent lights, like the ones hanging on the top of a, school that would like flicker and freak you out as a kid. And you walk through it and it's like walking through a cathedral of light. So I'm going to stop gushing now about the stuff I like about Hirst before I talk about his probably most controversial piece to date, which is the Diamond Skull. And I'm going to talk about the work he does that probably makes him the most money, but that I absolutely stinking hate. Damien Hirst, I hate your dot paintings. I hate your damn dot paintings. They are damn dot paintings, and I hate your dot paintings. But at the same time, I kind of like them. Like, they look good on my wall. I'm not gonna lie. And the first time I realized after grad school that art is really sold to an elite group of rich people that I probably will never jive with very well as a person, because gosh darn it, I'm just a little white trash, was one of your works, Mr. Hirst. It was a piece hanging on a wall in a very expensive Soho loft in a architectural digest magazine that was just sent to me for free for a couple of months. And I'm on the toilet where I'm apt to read most things because in theory no one's going to talk to me when I'm in there. See, white trash, I told you. And I'm looking down at this, what I know is a Damien Hirst dot painting, and man, it looks as good as anything you'd buy at Target on that wall, but it costs a whole lot more money. They look pretty good on a wall. Their color theory is very sound. He says that he's extremely influenced by a minimalist painter in England named John Hoyland, and I can see the parallel a little bit, especially in the pieces where he's doing like test color swatches. And there is something to be said about mass production and artwork, and there is something to be said about the fact that he makes crazy amounts of money off of polka dots. And I guess the kitsch of it doesn't I mean, it's in dialogue a little bit with his other works, but there isn't that sense of life and death. The best argument I can see for those dot paintings is when they're in rooms with a lot of his other works, especially the things you can see through, like the formaldehyde vats, it almost becomes a wallpaper that whimsically decorates what's otherwise a very disturbing room. And probably what would piss a lot of my listeners off is he doesn't paint these. He's not made a dot painting in years. Like, he jokes about how his interns make them. He has some feedback on color, and occasionally he'll come in and correct their mistakes. Like I said with the Impressionist podcast, artist assistants are an accepted industry practice. You have to learn somehow, and a university education does not guarantee you a job and doesn't always teach you everything you need to know. I don't like the dot paintings. And that's probably the easiest piece you make, but there is not that grand sense of life and death. There isn't that interesting dialogue with value and lack of value. And, I just said some pieces of artwork, they're just supposed to be there and in a room and hanging on a wall. But I guess I always like stripes more than polka dots at the end of the day. So earlier in the podcast, I said the word crystal skull. I should have said diamond skull. Did I say diamond skull or crystal skull? It's been like 3 whole minutes since I said that. Please forgive me. I have the attention span of a very dumb gnat. Mr. Hirst got to a point in his career where he's so stinking rich. I keep saying that. I'm impressed. I want $300 million. If somebody would just give me $1 million, I would. He sees himself in a different light than the struggling young artist that he used to be, and decides to make a piece that references all of the crap we've been talking about, but also is what someone who has become like the rich, culturally influential elite of England can only do. And so he takes a skull from I think it's the 1600s, has it cast in a different material. I want to say it's platinum. He has real human teeth shoved in it. And then he covers it with pristine, perfectly cut diamonds. Like, there's well over $100 million worth of diamonds put on this piece. And I want to say the Tate in England owns it, which is a contemporary arts museum in London. I could be wrong here. He even does some neat side prints where he prints a picture of the skull on black paper and then sprinkles the diamond dust from the cuttings onto it and lets it fall inside of a shadow box. So you always have this picture of the skull with the remnants of the skull, much like you had that giant cigarette ashtray full of cigarettes that are decaying, just like you had the cabinets that are full of diamonds and pills and such. And the diamond dust will always be down in there, the part of the skull's life that didn't adhere to the skull. So maybe it's like the flesh, so maybe it's like everything else. I really like the prints. I like the diamond skull. I think it looks neat. And I believe that the skull is titled For the Love of God. So you see that kind of weird, glib sense of humor that Damien Hirst seems to have in the title. And the next piece he makes in this series is an infant skull. And baby skulls are shaped very, very different from adult skulls. They're very tapered around the chin, and they come up into this big bulbous shape. And you can see the little lines from the soft parts of the skull that make it to where it can pass through the birth canal. Hirst says he chose to do the baby skull because he realized there was something more expensive than white diamonds, and that's pink diamonds. And the baby skull is pink, and pink diamonds on the main part and blue diamonds for the little seams. People were outraged by this, probably about on the same level as the other one. It was just him acting up again. And I feel like child mortality is one of the things that is harder to talk about in the public, because it's something, I wish no one ever had to talk or think about. But it's kind of the same deal. You have in these two pieces, you have birth and you have adulthood. And yet at the same time, they're both symbols of death. And I think to say that death is obscene is maybe a little bit fair, because it's certainly one of the hardest things we can go through as a human being, and that an artist can expensively but simply make so much commentary with just one piece of artwork. I feel like it's amazing. In my opinion, Damien Hirst's work, especially this period, is going to go on and be understood to be one of the most influential pieces of work during this century. And, you kind of have to look at what it did to fashion design. After he put that diamond skull out and it was all over everything, that's when skulls on like fabric t-shirts, everything else just kind of exploded. It was like it gave the public permission to indulge in this weird piece of memento mori, and it put death on like kitschy, grandiose display on everybody's articles of clothing, on posters, on cars, on stickers, on children's attire. Like, what is more obscene? Your infant running around in pink footy pajamas with little skulls instead of polka dots, or the reproduction of a baby skull with pink and blue diamonds that's now worth millions. I mean, a child's life is priceless, but you're decorating your child with death. A child's life is priceless, but you're decorating the skull of an infant with diamonds. Where is the obscenity? Which one is worse than the other one? Or is this all just part of our culture and part of ourselves that we need to learn to understand? And I'm going to now read you a quote by Damien Hirst that I feel like explains this. It's a very short quote and talks about death and art and life and everything in between. And I'm just going to leave this here. I want you to think about that, and please like, share, comment. But you know what? Leave me a comment about whether or not you agree with this or what you just think about the whole Damien Hirst thing. I'd be really interested to understand. And if this is like just too heavy of a subject matter to you, if I need to do artists like Hirst less often, let me know. So the quote is, "Art's about life, and it can't really be about anything else. There isn't anything else." Thanks for listening to this episode of Art I Swear on Damien Hirst. I don't really have a creative shout out for this podcast, so I tell you what, just hug your cats, don't declaw them. Just don't do it. Don't do it. Music for Art I Swear, as usual, is provided by Joe Giggs. If you're looking for a DJ in the New York City area who sparkles better than a crystal skull, check out Joe Giggs, and that's Gigs. Samples provided by The Conant Project by Iridile. I'm Vanessa Van Alstyne, and you have a creative day.